I had to speak last week because of the sin of Eileen, who developed an illness, which meant that I had to come on at the last minute. I made some very inappropriate disclosures about myself, and that was your fault, Eileen. Anyway, I'm back again to speak on the next I am saying in John's Gospel, Jesus, I am the light of the world. And so I think I'll just read our passage. This is from chapter 8, beginning at verse 12. Jesus spoke again to the people, and he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. The Pharisees challenged him. Here you are, appearing as your own witness. Your testimony is not valid. Jesus answered, if I testify on my own behalf, my testimony is valid, for I know where I came from and where I'm going. But you have no idea where I came from or where I'm going. You judge by human standards. I pass judgment on no one, but if I do judge, my decisions are true because I'm not alone. I stand with the Father who sent me. In your own law it's written that the testimony of two witnesses is true. I'm the one who testifies for myself. My other witness is the Father who sent me. Then they asked him, where is your Father? You do not know me or my Father, Jesus replied. If you knew me, you would know my Father also. He spoke these words while teaching in the temple courts near the place where the offerings were put. Yet no one seized him because his hour had not yet come. Now, just before this reading, we have the well-known story of the woman caught in the act of committing adultery, or the religious patriarchy is exposed, as I prefer to call it. And in this instance, a woman is brought before Jesus and thrown down in front of him. And religious leaders want to know what Jesus thinks should happen to her. She's broken the law. She's been caught in the act of committing adultery. And this interaction appears to have been interjected into an ongoing dialogue that begins in chapter 7 and continues here in chapter 8. A debate between Jesus and the Pharisees, part of the religious leadership of the people of Israel. And begins in verse 12 with, when Jesus spoke again to the people, so he's still speaking in the temple on the last day, the great day of the Festival of Tabernacles. And Jesus' purpose in chapter 7 and 8 of this gospel is to reveal his true identity. He wants to reveal his true identity to the people who are gathered all around him in the temple. And in that, he's aided and abetted by the objections of the religious leaders. So, for example, in chapter 7, verse 37, he cries out, if anybody's thirsty, let them come to me and drink, thereby claiming to be the source of life-giving, eternally satisfying water at a time when water was being poured out in huge quantities during this festival. And in chapter 8, verse 12, he says, I am the light of the world, thereby claiming to be the very light of life itself. Every night during the Festival of Tabernacles, the Jews would light 4 huge lamps in the court of women in the temple, the very place where Jesus most likely uttered these words. He is the one towards whom these ceremonies point and in whom they will find their fulfillment. In chapter 7, verse 38, Jesus urges the people, whoever believes in me. And in chapter 8, verse 12, he urges them, whoever follows me. And the promises for those who respond are astonishing. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture says, streams of living water will flow within them. And whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So in chapter 7, 37 to 52 and 8, 12 to 20, we have assertions about Jesus' true identity, the call to respond by believing in him, and the promise of what he can do for those who respond, the gift of living water, the gift of the light of life. And these claims basically spark huge controversy amongst those who hear Jesus making them. Firstly, amongst the people in general, who are seriously confused about what he means. On hearing this, chapter 7, some of the people said, surely this man is the prophet. Others said he's the Messiah. Still others said, how can the Messiah come from Galilee? Does not Scripture say the Messiah will come from David's descendants and from Bethlehem, the town where David lived? Thus the people were divided because of Jesus. Some wanted to seize him. No one laid a hand on him. So huge controversy about what Jesus means when he says these things amongst the people, and also amongst the Pharisees, the Jewish religious leadership. Verse 13, here you are appearing as your own witness. Your testimony is not valid. And so the Pharisees seek to brush aside what Jesus says about himself because he's making a claim on his own behalf. And in Jewish law, there had to be two witnesses to establish a claim. And so their point is, well, you can say what you want about yourself, but that's not a valid claim because it's just you making the claim. And this goes to the heart of what I describe as the Jesus problem on the life course. I like to say to people who have happily ventured in to have a chat about the big questions of life. In fact, I think there's somebody here this morning who thought we were simply going to be having a conversation about, issues in life. Well, fair enough, that's what it sort of says. And came along and then in week 3 of the life course, suddenly I will say, I would like to give you the Jesus problem. And it's like an exploding bomb. And the exploding impact of the bomb gets worse every week as we go through the different aspects of the Jesus problem. And we begin the Jesus problem with the consideration of Jesus' character. Part of the problem of his identity. On the one hand, Jesus in the New Testament is clearly a human being, just like anybody else, as the evidence demonstrates. And on the other hand, he makes claims about himself and appears to be able to do things that only God would do, as the same evidence demonstrates. Now, the thing is, there is no other evidence. So it's not like, despite the Da Vinci Code or another sort of reworked ideas. There are lots of other gospels you can consider. They've just been suppressed by the church, etc., etc. The reality is the only sources we actually have of information about the historical Jesus are the 4 gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so basically the evidence that we have before us describes somebody who is a human being just like you and me. But also the same evidence describes behaviors and claims that are out of all proportion to what an enlightened human being might say about himself or be able to do. It's true that Jesus' disciple group go on to confirm the claims that Jesus makes about himself, and they're able to point to the resurrection of which they were eyewitnesses as a vindication of the claims that Jesus makes about himself. And in the same way, when we hear stories of answers to prayer in the services and on other occasions, we're able to say that these answers to prayer vindicate our claims about Jesus. But the problem of Jesus' identity does not begin with us. The problem of Jesus' identity goes right back to the claims that Jesus makes about himself. Claims that are out of all proportion to those made by any other philosopher or any other religious leader. Jesus simply does not offer people ideas about life. He claims to be the fullness of life itself. He doesn't offer ideas about the truth, about religion. He doesn't claim to enlighten the mind. He claims to personify the deepest things that we need. So, hence, you need water, don't you, to survive? I am the water. You need light to be enabled to see. I am the light. He claims to be everything that we need. And this is a problem for people today. It's always been a problem. Mehmet referred to the problem. He didn't want Jesus to be the only way. This is a problem for people because we want to rescue. People would like to rescue the historical Jesus from such self-relatedness and focus on his wonderful example of altruism, being selfless and caring for other people and being concerned for those who are outcasts. But the Jesus of the Gospels, the only evidence on which we can proceed, does not allow us to do this. He says in verse 14, even if he's the sole witness to the claims he makes, it's possible that there could be no other. His basic argument to the Pharisees saying, well, you're bearing witness about yourself is, well, it's possible that I'm the only person who could actually tell you where I came from and where I'm going to. It's possible that you haven't got a clue, isn't it? Because you know nothing, because you judge by human standards. How could you possibly know things of eternity? How could you possibly know what began in the beginning, who was where with whom? So, it's a good point, really. The only way, in fact, that we can ever know anything about God is if God chooses to reveal it. And again, we would prefer that we might work out our own spirituality, define from all the various pick and mix things on offer, what we might want to dabble in, a bit of tarot, maybe a bit of astrology, a bit of crystals. I was in a supermarket yesterday and somebody was staring fixedly at the flowers. Do you know why? They told the shop assistant because they're manifesting that somebody will buy them these flowers. So manifesting is the idea that if you just think about it hard enough, you'll get one. I'm going to try that with a lottery. I'll let you know how that goes. In fact, I think I've been doing that for a long time and it hasn't worked. Lisa, one of our staff team who oversees the youth, led an exercise with us recently asking us to identify the human difficulties with coming near to God as Father, coming near to God as God the Son, and coming near to God the Holy Spirit, respectively. Now, pain in our relationships with our fathers might affect our ability to draw near to God as Father, and fear about what might happen if we opened ourselves to the Spirit might inhibit our ability to draw near to God as Spirit or open ourselves to Him. But with the Son, the issue is simply one of revelation. Because once you've come to believe in the Son, once you've realized who He is, you readily draw near to Him. If you've not understood who He is, you do not draw near to Him. It's as simple as that. Jesus alone came from above to reveal the Father, and Jesus alone will return to the Father. Therefore, He alone is able to testify to these things. The question for us this morning is exactly the same as it has always been, which is, are we going to accept His testimony? His testimony remains what it is. The question is, have you accepted His word about Himself? Jesus points out that human beings left to themselves cannot comprehend His claims because you judge by human standards, 8:15. My wife and I have just come to the end of a very long and convoluted process of selling a property, and on more than one occasion it would have been very helpful to have a greater knowledge about what was going to happen. For example, it would have been really useful to know there was going to be the first drop in property values for a very long time. I'd say I wish I was omniscient, but I don't know. Oh, thank you. I actually contacted Ruth, who comes to the church, because I was worried no one would get that. I'm just going to say it again for those who weren't really concentrating. I'd say I wish I was omniscient, but I don't know. Okay, no. The thing is, I would not be able to cope with being omniscient in any way whatsoever. But had we not been hampered by having a very limited understanding of what was going on during the cottage selling process, we would have made different decisions. Jesus' point is that as human beings, we're actually severely limited in our ability to judge correctly about anything, really. And that's probably why the story of the exposure of the religious patriarchy, the woman caught in adultery, has been placed where it's been placed in this gospel, because it perfectly demonstrates a contrast between a limited religious human perspective and a gracious divine one, where indeed this woman has broken the law, but indeed the Son of God, who is the fulfillment of the law, is able to set her free by forgiving sins. On the life course, I've always argued that relativism, the theory that there is no absolute truth, that truth is relative, is definitely the best we can do if God has not revealed Himself to us. Relativists are surely right to point out that we are severely limited in our ability to discern what is true left to ourselves. Hence the popular but facile analogy of the religious people of the world and the elephant. You're probably familiar with this. Imagine a huge elephant. All the different adherents of religions are touching the elephant, but they're touching a different part of the elephant. And the theory is that what they don't realize that they're all basically, heading up the same mountain from different directions. They're touching the same animal, right? But they just got hold of different bits. Now, the problem with this is it presupposes the existence of somebody who's above and beyond and can actually see that everybody's touching different bits of the elephant. Now, the thing is, this analogy is meant to be a confirmation of the power of relativism, that truth is relative. But actually, what it demonstrates is that relativists think they're absolutely right. At which point, they're not relativists; they're absolutists. See what I mean? So, in other words, if there's a relativist that can see, bless all the religious people, then they think they've all got it, but actually they're all going for the same thing. That presupposes this objective relativist observer who's able to actually pontificate about all truth, which does not make them a relativist at all. It makes them an absolutist. So that's the problem with that whole analogy. In fact, we're all in the same position of limited perception unless God has chosen to reveal himself. That's the thing. Jesus, sublime ethicist, in the opinion of everyone, creator of the greatest, author of the greatest ethical system, or a greatest description of how life should be lived, above and beyond anybody else, an extraordinary statement of the beauty of a life lived flawlessly or perfectly in the Sermon on the Mount. Same person claims to be without any moral shortcoming whatsoever. Think about that. There are no great religious leaders that have done that. Buddha died saying, "I die seeking the truth." Buddha died of dysentery. Muhammad did not claim to be God. He claimed to be a spokesperson for God. Gandhi said that it's not a good idea for people to think that they are too wise, because even the wisest person errs or makes mistakes. By contrast, Jesus says to his opponents, "Which one of you can convict me of any wrongdoing whatsoever?" He claims to be flawless. Now, what kind of great ethicist does that? This is part of the Jesus problem, big time, because he is either a megalomaniac, he's either somebody with some kind of grandiose, mental problem, or he is who he says he is. In a way, the old thing, which is that Jesus is either mad, bad, or God, still holds. Mad, bad, or God, what do you think? He's either mentally ill, and in which case, how does he produce something as sublime as this? How does he behave in such an extraordinary way as to release this woman caught in the act of committing adultery and come out with such extraordinary wisdom on so many other occasions? So if he's mentally ill, he's an unusually mentally ill person, remarkably stable, remarkably peaceful, remarkably at home with himself, at home in his own flesh, extraordinary. And yet, the other alternative is that, that he's actively deceiving people. Is he bad? Is he deliberately trying to con us? It's hard to reconcile that with his behavior. It's hard to hold that together with the picture of him that emerges from the Gospels. And that just leads to one inevitable conclusion, that he is who he says he is. And people have either seen that or they haven't. And so, as Mehmet said in the video we heard, when he realized who Jesus was, the colors changed. And that's the interesting use of words to me, because my best friend, when he became a Christian, he was riding a bike in Cambridge. And when he gave his life to Christ while riding this bike, he got his color vision back. Previously, he could see no color vision, but he was healed of this blindness of color and was able to see all things. And people will often talk about that when they become Christians, that everything seems to be different. The colors are different, the sounds are different, people's faces are different. That's because Jesus makes everything new, because Jesus is the renewer. He's the life giver. He's the light. He's the bread. Once you've actually tasted the bread, seen the light, as it were, everything is changed, because now you're interacting with the person who is the Son of God. That has either happened to you or it has not. Jesus stands at the door of the heart, and he invites people to open the door to him. And if you do open the door to him, he will definitely meet with you. We believe that God has revealed himself through the creation that he's made. He's revealed himself through his interactions with his people, the people of Israel. But supremely, we believe that he's revealed himself in the person of his Son. Therefore, we don't need to experiment with innumerable things that might satisfy our deepest thirst, as if there is no living water. Neither do we need to stumble around in the darkness as though there's no true light in the world. Jesus' statement in verse 15 of our reading, "You judge by human standards, I pass judgment on no one," is consistent with what John says earlier in his gospel, which is that Jesus has not come to judge, but to save. He then says, however, "But if I do judge, my decisions are true, because I'm not alone. I stand with my Father who sent me," in verse 16. So in fact, there is a second witness who confirms both the judgment and testimony of the Son, and that is the Father, verses 17 and 18. So initially, Jesus makes the point that his testimony is true anyway, because no other mere human being could confirm what he's saying. But now he asserts that his eternal Father is also a witness to these things. To which the Pharisees respond, "Where is your Father?" in verse 19. And that echoes what the exasperated Philip, one of his own disciples, would go on to ask. "Lord, show us the Father. It's enough for us." Jesus said to him, "Have I been with you so long, and you still don't know me, Philip? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, 'Show us the Father'? Do you not believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words I say to you, I don't speak on my own authority, but the Father living in me who does his works says them. Believe me that I'm in the Father's in me, or else believe on the evidence of the works themselves. It's well known that John's gospel is structured around 7 I am sayings, which we're considering in this series. So usually in the gospel there's a miraculous event, for example, the feeding of the 5,000 in John 6, followed by a speech that Jesus gives on an aspect of life that can only be found in him, culminating in an I am saying, in this case, I am the bread of life. Or in John 11, the raising of Lazarus from the dead is followed by a discourse from Jesus about life and death, culminating in the I am saying, I am the resurrection and the life. How are we meant to be sure that Jesus is the light of the world, the light of life? As I've said, we have to begin with his character in the Gospels. On the one hand, clearly a normal human being who lives, loves, and laughs. On the other hand, makes claims about himself well beyond what anybody else would make, and uniquely walks the talk. But we have more to consider than the character of Jesus. From the beginning of his ministry, the common refrain from those who heard Jesus preach and witnessed the acts of spiritual power that flowed all around him was that this was a new teaching and with authority. His bitter opponents, the Pharisees here, did not dispute that miraculous things happened through Jesus, which incidentally means there isn't a great historical basis for us doubting either. Because if you think about it, the people who hated him most had no qualms about saying, well, sure, he did miraculous things. They did question what his source of inspiration was, but they didn't question that they happened. And they had a vested interest in belittling him. His power to do the miraculous was also noted by Jewish and Roman historians as well. The Pharisees disputed the source of his inspiration, but not the fact that he did extraordinary things. And many of the people who heard him preach equated him with an Old Testament prophet because Old Testament prophets could do miraculous things. It makes sense to accept Jesus' claim to be the bread of life if we accept that he fed 5,000 people from nothing. It makes sense to accept Jesus' claim to be the resurrection and the life if we accept that Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. Ultimately, not only does Jesus have the utterly unprecedented power to raise the dead, but he himself is raised from the dead. And if that's not an unmistakable sign of the backing of his Father, I don't know what is. His Father taught him what to say, empowered him to say it, empowered him to perform miracles by his Spirit. And his Father raised him from the dead. As Jesus says, I and the Father are one. Or again, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So what Jesus offers is the light of life. I think that means the light of his Father's life, as opposed to the light of a merely human life without the inspiration of the Father. A life enlightened by the revelation of what the God the Father wants us to do, how we should live day to day in all the challenges of life, and what our purpose is upon the earth. As opposed to merely stumbling along, doing the best we can with what we've got, which is really a merely human perspective on our life. The conclusion of this discussion in 19 verse B is extremely important. So much so that I'm going to read it. You do not know me or my Father, Jesus replied. If you knew me, you would know my Father also. We cannot know the Father unless we first know the Son. There is no mediator between God in all his holiness and humankind in all our uncleanness other than God the Son. Hence the I am saying from John 14 verse 6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. If we know the Son, we can with absolute confidence, freedom, and boldness draw near to our Father and receive all that he's promised us. And that is what is on offer. Every time we come to church, every time we come near to God on our own, to come into the very presence of God. That is what we've been given as a huge privilege and opportunity, which we sort of are so blasé about, aren't we? Do you know, one of the things that surprised me most about being a church leader over the time is that when we have space in our services for people to tell stories of answer to prayer, sometimes people produce an absolutely stonking one. I mean, it's so incredible. And the congregation sits there and goes, you know, it might do this. I find it amazing. I am surprised there isn't more leaping around in church. I do have to say, I think leaping around is the more normal thing. I know we're English, and I don't like leaping around, right? But the fact is, it is a bit surprising. Because listen to what we're listening to. Think about it for 1 second. It's incredible, isn't it? Do you know what I think? We just take it for granted. Here we are, access to all the power of Almighty God. And we just sit there going, oh, yeah. Uh-huh. Do you know what's been interesting in recent times is the impact of our service on people that don't go to church? Because recently we've had quite a few people coming to church who don't normally come. So last week we had some very good stories, but I felt they went on too long because they got in the way of me speaking. And no, they did go on for quite a long time. It was really a mistake. But I'm explaining to a couple who've never been to anything like this before in their life. And basically, so I'm thinking, we normally have a bit for the kids, then we have singing. And the idea is we're trying to come near to God using the words and the music. And then often there'll be an opportunity for people to talk about what they think God is saying or to share stories of answer to prayer. And I was getting ready to say, I realized it was a little bit long this week. We loved the stories. We loved them. We cried through the whole thing. The stories were amazing. I'm going, okay, what do I know? Nothing, absolutely nothing. But I've seen that at the moment. I've seen that quite a bit. People coming in. Now, do you know what? That is the greatest compliment we can receive. Because the impact on outsiders is the test, according to Paul, who wrote so much of the New Testament, of whether the Spirit is with us. Are unbelievers falling to the floor saying, surely God is amongst you when we come to worship? So what we assume as normal is absolutely extraordinary to people who've never tasted and seen that the Lord is good.